Greg, I have 11 o'clock and the captions are working, so I think you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, I just started the recording. Welcome everyone. Thank you for attending the Real Cost of Accessibility Complaints and Lawsuits webinar with Greg Williams. My name is Christopher Lee. I'm the Managing Director of IAAP, which is a division of G3 ICT. We have a great presentation for you today. We will be offering some time at the very end for some questions, but use the Q&A in Zoom to do that. Do not use the chat function, but in the Q&A feature, please. We will be sending out handouts at the very end, as well as a link to a feedback survey. So be on the lookout for that. Again, we have a great crowd today, so welcome. And before I introduce Greg, I just want to say just a little bit about IAAP. If you're not familiar with IAAP, we are a nonprofit organization. Our focus is the accessibility professionals. And we have lots of different initiatives going on right now. Some of these are free, some of them are part of the membership of being with IAAP. We have different webinar series. This is one of these webinars that we offer. We focus in different sectors and topics, digital workplace inclusion, higher education, and so on. So do check us out on some of the great offerings that we have. We also have some additional initiatives. We're developing a subject matter expert speakers bureau. We're starting to collect names for that, and we have an educational training database that we'll be rolling out. We also have a special initiative around accessibility leadership, micro-credentials that will investigating whether or not that could be a micro-credential down the road. So please check us out online. We've got a lot of really nice initiatives coming out, some free offerings. We'll be doing a healthcare webinar next month, followed up by a webinar regarding the accessibility professional. So be on the lookout for that. Join us on LinkedIn, join us on Facebook or Twitter. Okay, and now I'd like to introduce our presenter today. He has an incredible resume. I went to LinkedIn this morning, Greg, and I saw your resume. I was so impressed. But Greg Williams is the Accessibility Program Officer Executive at DQ. He oversees program development and operations for some of DQ's largest customers, helping them to build a mature, sustainable accessibility programs. Prior to joining DQ, Greg spent more than 30 years in the IT field, focusing on large, complex programs tied to Fortune 500 companies. He's always been passionate about diversity and inclusion and has extended his passion to the disability and accessibility community, joining DQ Systems to help launch successful programs across the globe. So Greg, the stage is yours. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll stop sharing and you can go.
All right, thank you so much, Christopher, for that introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And I appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us today to talk about accessibility complaints and lawsuits. First, I want to thank the IAAP for providing me the opportunity to talk to you, as well as Christopher, Rachel, Kevin, and others facilitating today, and it's just an excellent opportunity. And I believe I have a great topic that's going to, help you all quite a bit. As Christopher said, I've been involved with diversity and inclusion for many, many years, and had the opportunity at a Fortune 40 company to found and mature an accessibility program to really a state of self-sustainability, which is what I'm sure everybody is looking for in building accessible content by default. And so, this topic and my own passion and what IAAP is all about matches DQ's mission, which is really digital equality. And so, we look forward to working with everybody, IAAP and all of you, to bring digital equality to everyone, and we're excited about that. What I want to do today is to paint a picture for your organization, and it provides you with some information that you probably don't have, because these things aren't talked about much. At least they're not talked about from a qualitative standpoint. They're talked about quantitative, so we know that there are lawsuits and complaints. But what I've been able to do is I've been able to gather a lot of information and also personal experience from complaints and litigations across many Fortune 100 companies. And so all of this data is anonymized. It is from many different companies. And, of course, I can't disclose, who they come from, but I have taken, the averages here, and you can count this as real world data. And in fact, because I've provided some variables here that we'll talk about in a minute, you can adopt this to your organization and create some real expectations around what complaints and lawsuits might cost you. So first off, I want to do a brief legal update. There's lots of people that do legal updates. I definitely recommend Lainey Feingold for the great detail here and the things that she does in this space. But we do know that accessibility related lawsuits have exploded or exponentially increased. Use whichever descriptive term you'd like, but in 2018, 181%. So from 2017, 814 to 2018, 2,285. And I've got a graph here that just a simple bar graph that shows, those cases as well, so that you can see the increase, the massive increase that we've had there. And these are publicly available numbers. And of course, as I continue to speak about this, I'll update those as we go. But that is quite an increase year to year. And it's really due to several different reasons. We start to think about where we see these lawsuits happening as well. And so we do see a lot of them in Florida and a lot of them in New York. In fact, for Florida, there was, so the number of web accessibility lawsuits in 2018 as of December 20, when this information became available, 726 in Florida, 142 in New York. The average number of cases filed per month, so 61 in Florida, 123 in New York. And then the percentage of lawsuits that came from each state in 2018, again, these represent the majority, 32% and 64%. So people theorize, why we see these centralizing. And actually, it's happening everywhere, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But some of this has to do with the firms that we see who are active in litigation. Some of it has to do with the very active plaintiffs we have, but also with the district courts and some of the things that we see, when they are more conservative or more liberal on the rules and judgments here. So just a couple of things to keep in mind that we do see a couple of states taking, some very heavy action here. There are, however, lawsuits spread all over the place. And so we have the top 10 states here. And again, just another simple line graph, but Connecticut, and this is from least to most. So Connecticut, Georgia, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Florida, and then California, New York that we talked about before. And another interesting thing to point out is that 11% of the companies sued or under suit are headquartered internationally, including Italy, France, Japan, and Brazil. So not just a phenomenon in the United States, but also something that we're actually seeing worldwide on the international stage take place. Where are these lawsuits occurring? And this is more detail on some industries that are getting most of the lawsuits. And we actually see the lawsuits come out in batches in some cases, but it's very much spread across everything, although we see some like banking and financial that are targeted more heavily across those. But we've seen lawsuits in retail, in travel and hospitality, in the entertainment sector, in the food service industry, banking and financial, as I talked about before, and self-service. So things to keep in mind here is, again, the lawsuits are spread out across the United States and internationally, as well as across multiple industries. So as we think about, the increase here and why do we have an increase in these, and it's a number of different factors. Part of it is, we do have some predatory litigation that's going on, and certainly we do have some legal firms that are trying to take advantage of the laws and get some settlements, and everybody's heard about and seen the demand letters. But we also have a marked increase in people who are using their digital channel, or companies who want to use their digital channel as the primary method of providing their products and service. And so it's not just that people are filing lawsuits because, we've got some kind of demand situation going. We have real people wanting to do real things and really wanting to use your products and your services, and they're unable to do it. And so as a result, they're typically going to contact you and let you know that they have an issue with what's going on. And so I'm not talking about the predatory suits in this nature. I'm talking about, a real customer or prospective customer that's unable to do something. And so what we get in this case is typically we'll call it a complaint or feedback, put it in a more positive nature. But for a complaint, we do have a chance. There's certainly a chance if the right things are done to avoid litigation. And doing the right things is a practice that has to be thoughtfully put in place. You have to have the infrastructure to receive the complaint. You have to have the background operations to make the customer whole, and you have to have the ability to then fix the issue so it doesn't occur over and over again. But in order to do all those things, you have to have money. You're going to have to set up services that require people, and people require money. Everybody likes to get paid. So you need to make a business case, right? To say we need to be able to handle these complaints, and in handling these complaints, we're going to, make sure that our customers or prospective customers are happy. We're going to increase our market share. We're going to control our cost, perhaps, operations costs, because we're operating in the digital channel versus a call center or in person, which is more expensive. But we're also going to avoid litigation. And so there's multiple reasons to do this. But let's talk about complaints for a minute and what those can actually cost you as a company when they come in. So you've received an accessibility complaint. What are we going to do about that? And some of the key questions here are around the initial response. So how was the initial complaint handled? Was it handled with expediency? Was it handled with empathy? Is the person who took the complaint and handled the initial response trained in disability, accommodation, and accessibility so that they don't ask a person with a disability to do something that they obviously can't do? How long did it take the customer to get to someone who could help? So do we have a direct path to help? Or did it take them a while to bounce through the various call centers for some large organizations to finally get to someone who understood disability, accommodation, and accessibility? And once again, was all of this done with empathy and speed? And hopefully that's the answer. If that's not the answer, then these are three things that you'll definitely want to focus and make sure that your operations are able to do on a consistent basis. And then once we've handled the complaint, we have to know, do we have an unhappy customer? Some complaints are just around the nature of something tangential to a product or service that maybe is a bother but not a complete blocker. Sometimes people are missing out on something. They're unable to use a coupon. They're unable to get some type of time-sensitive opportunity. And do we have a motivated customer with real issue and real damage? And this really comes into play if we miss our opportunity with the complaint and extend into a lawsuit. But many times when you're receiving feedback on the accessibility of your digital presence, you've got somebody, a customer, or again, a prospective customer, doesn't always have to be a customer, who wants to do business with your company. And then finally, even if we have an accessibility issue and if they miss something, have we made them whole with a delightful experience? So if they were unable to get some product that they wanted, have we provided an accommodation that can get it to them? If they were unable to get some opportunity or service, have we made sure that we're able to provide that service? And have we made that person feel like we understand their problem? And have we told them we're going to fix it? Because we need to fix it. We don't want to just accommodate these. We want to make sure that, again, they can operate in the digital channel independently to use your products and services. So I'm going to put some real costs on all this. And I spoke on this at CSUN earlier this year, and I got a lot of questions on these blended rates. Everybody really focused heavily on those. And I just want to say that the blended rates are just for illustrative purposes. You know what it costs to do business at your company. And so as you use this information to develop, real numbers for, business case proposals or cost justification, other things, put your numbers in here. If it's $80 an hour at your company, put that there. If it's $200 an hour, use that. You'll see that this information, you can definitely modify it and use it how you want. In addition, the tasks that I have here are really representative across, again, several large organizations of tasks. You may have additional tasks that you have to do, and you can add those in, but this is going to give you a good idea of what some other Fortune 100 companies are experienced experiencing when they respond to a complaint. So who do we have involved? We've got call center personnel who are going to have to take the call, and probably call center management who are going to be involved in escalation. We are going to have to let our compliance and regulatory personnel know about this, because we are in violation of the law, right? Americans with Disabilities Act for places of public accommodation. Product management is going to have to know about this because we have to fix it. Developers, quality assurance testing, deployment, and operations, when we do fix it, we're going to have to spin this up either into a project that's focused specifically on this, or this scope is going to have to go into an existing project and replace something else that we were going to do. So it might be a little disruptive. So across all of those activities, what's it going to cost us? And this is just a simple chart that illustrates the hours, the number of participants, the hours per participant, the total hours spent, and then the extended cost. And keep in mind, the extended cost is calculated using the $120 an hour average that I use there, and you can certainly use something else if it makes sense for you. But let's just go through some of the actions and say, what's really going to happen when this complaint comes in? Well, the call center organization, email, chat receipt, it's going to come in some way, and there's going to be a call center person. They'll probably spend an average of about 45 minutes on it. And so this is taking the call, understanding what's going wrong, documenting in the system, responding to the person, and getting them to somebody who can help. Then we're going to have to accommodate the person. So if they were unable to make their payment, if they were unable to purchase a product, if they were unable to schedule a service, somebody's going to have to do that too. It may be in your call center organization, could be somewhere else, but we're probably going to have a couple of people involved here. Again, maybe 45 minutes to do this. So 1.5 hours with extended cost of $180. Now the issue is going to have to be documented fully in a way that we can fix it. So we're going to have some requirements, potentially some stories that will be created if you're doing agile development. And so we've got a person who will have to do that, again, expecting about 45 minutes to do that, $90 an hour. We've got to process the issue. So this is just general background processing, one person for an hour and a half. Then we get to some of the more expensive things to do. And so we're going to have to spool up a project. And in this case, I'm taking an example where we're going to have to start a project to fix this. So this is not injecting into an existing effort. This would be starting something net new. So 5 participants, 4.5 hours each to get the thing kicked off, $540. Then we're going to have to write the code. So we've got one person who might spend, 9 hours, depending on how, difficult it was. If this is something simple like, alt text for a submit button, it could be easy to fix. If it's something more complex like a carousel, it could be more hours, but we're going to take 9 hours as the average here for about $1,000. Then we're going to have to QA that once that code is developed. And so we got one person with about 7.5 hours. Again, it is an average for $900. There's going to have to be a production issuance. And so there are always multiple people involved in production issuances. And so we've got 5 people at about 4.5 hours each. And so this could be regression testing or, live testing after you've put it out there to make sure that your fixes are working. So 22 hours, approximately $2,700. Then we're going to have to spool down the project. Let's not forget that once we've started something, we have to finish it too. So there's going to be administrative effort for 5 people there, 2.5 hours, all the folks that were involved to close it out. And someone needs to follow up with the customer. So although we've heard them and we've understood them and we've accommodated them, we still need to close the loop with them and say, hey, we heard you, we understood, we accommodated you, but we fixed this so that the next time you try to do it, you can do it yourself. You can be independent. Just like everyone else who's using the website. So one person here, again, approximately 45 minutes. So that's going to come out to, a grand total, this reactive fixed loss. I'm going to jump down. So there's 4 lines in this table. I'm going to jump to the 3rd line, which is reactive fixed loss of about $10,000. And again, we're just adding up all of the extended costs in the previous table. I want to talk a little bit about the scale factor, design versus product defects. So let's say that this was something that had to do with maybe alt text for, an actionable image or anything other than an informative image. The design should have carried that, but if it didn't, and that escaped into development, and then escaped into QA, and then finally escaped into production, the scale factor here is quite immense because you're having to go back and disrupt the organization. You're having to go back and maybe start a whole new project to fix this. And so we have seen that it can cost up to 100 times more to fix this. So if the reactive fix loss is about $10,000, then the proactive fix cost, if we had found it in design and said, I'm just going to go ahead and take a little bit more of the designer's time to fix this, would be about $100 at that 100x scale. And again, these defects are no different than anything else your organization deals with. So if you've got a good number for your scale factor for defect containment and defects escaping into subsequent phases, feel free to use that number there too. But if we look at this and we look at a lot of reactive fixes, even if we only have 100 complaints in a year and they end up in a reactive fix, we've just wasted essentially $1 million. So not small dollars when you think about this, and not even at, let's say we had 50 complaints that we had to fix in a reactive manner, still $500,000. So a lot of money when you sit down and you think about it. And again, I'm going to go back to all of the things that we have to do. So this big list here, when you really think about everything that's going to occur, the cost can be significant. And that $1 million, by the way, is $1 million that you could have spent on something else. You could have spent it on other functional improvements to your website, or you could have spent it on an accessibility program or accessibility services to be able to avoid introducing these things in the first place. So what can we do about this? How do we prevent this from happening? DQ has, our mantra is shift left. And we say shift left. What we mean by that, if you think of the software development lifecycle as a continuum from the left to the right, when we have design on the left, or concept and design on the left, and production or maintenance on the right, we want to move this activity as far to the left as possible. So address things in design, have design reviews, equip your people in development to be able to do some testing right there in the development phase before you ever even get to QA. There are many tools out there that you can use to do that. DQ has some as well, but there's a lot of these things that can be checked from an automated standpoint, and you absolutely should be running as much automated testing as possible with your developers or in your build process. But you do want to make sure that the tools that you use don't have any false positives. So make sure whatever you're choosing to use here, it's not giving you inactionable information. And then the last thing you want to do is something I talked about earlier. You want to enable your response channels for customer complaints to handle contacts with expediency, empathy, efficiency, and finally that permanent fix. So make sure that in the event this does occur, we're handling the customer complaint in a way that avoids the costs that we're going to talk about next with litigation. So that was the information on the complaint. Again, I urge you to, calculate those numbers for your own organization and demonstrate that, rather than losing that money to reactive work, let's proactively invest it in making sure that we don't introduce the accessibility issues into our website. So let's talk about the lawsuit. And certainly things get interesting when you're served with a lawsuit. All kinds of people get excited about that. And it's going to probably cost your organization quite a bit of money to deal with this. So your company has received the lawsuit, and what do we do about that now? So the lawsuit is certainly going to require new and more expensive resources than the resource team that we had on the complaint. It's also going to demand a protracted response, and which will be burdensome. I think I said should be here at one point, but let's just say it's going to be burdensome. It's activity that you don't want to have to undertake. It's also going to involve senior levels of your company, and they're going to want to know about the aggregate risk to the company that occurs from introducing, and addressing this lawsuit. Risk in terms of monetary losses, which in some cases, especially under ADA with injunctive relief, may not be that great, but a short timeline to fix a lot of things is very expensive if you've got major problems and end up in some type of settlement or consent decree. And the brand damage that can occur with these is probably much more costly than what you'll deal with even with the lawsuit cost. And then generally for most companies, they're going to retain some type of outside counsel representation to help them with accessibility, as is kind of a niche subject for most legal teams at this point. Excuse me. So again, let's talk about what's costing. What is this going to cost us? And so now I've changed the blended rate up to $225 an hour. And I will tell you that several lawyers came to me at CSUN after I talked about this and said that 225 is way low. Once again, this is just representative. I didn't want these business case numbers to be, just fantastically high. So I chose $225 an hour. If you've got something that works better for you, or you're more aware of what that would be, certainly, feel free to change that number. Who are the people we're going to have involved? We're going to have senior company leadership, compliance and regulatory personnel, internal legal counsel at your company, internal legal support, because counsel doesn't operate without some type of support. You're going to involve your subject matter experts in this. So while you want your subject matter experts focusing on that shift left theory of making sure we don't introduce issues in design and development, instead they're going to be focused on helping create response to the lawsuit. You're also probably, if you don't have a lot of internal subject matter experts, going to retain some external subject matter experts. It's going to involve, if you have a centralized accessibility team, it's going to involve the leadership from there. And then again, developers in quality assurance testing, and then deployment operations and marketing, because you're still going to have to fix issues that come out of this lawsuit. So a new table here, again, just based off the same one that we had for complaints. So we've got the action and the number of participants and the average hours for participant and the total hours, and finally the extended cost. And reminder, the extended cost is coming off that $225 an hour, which you can modify if you need to. So some different things going on here. Now we've got lawyers assigned, we've got business notified, so different parts of the business, including your senior leadership team, are going to have to know about this and be briefed on it. So 8 participants here, a couple hours each, 16 hours, extended cost $3,600. Outside counsel retainer, and again, everybody told me this was very low, but I'm just going to use 150 for, again, illustrative purposes. So 150,000, we're going to assume that we're going to use all that retainer. You may or may not, but probably so, and 150,000 is, again, probably low. Initial communication to involved parties, there's going to be a lot of involved parties here. So I've got 45 people, a couple of hours for participant. To understand this, they're probably going to have to attend a meeting. So we've got 90 hours, $20,000. One thing that people forget a lot is there's going to be some hold order processing. So any large company has records retention policies, and when a lawsuit occurs, they'll generally put a hold on all the documentation that's relevant to the suit. So in that hold order processing, people are going to have to be notified and respond and retain and maybe put documents in a special place. So we've got 45 people here, again, 3 hours per participant for 135 hours and $30,000. Outside counsel documents, so we retain outside counsel, but they're not going to know much about your website and your operations, and so they're going to have to be briefed in. We've got 8 people there creating information, 8 hours per participant, 64 hours, $14,000. Initial discovery as ordered by the judge. So there are some jurisdictions that do this regularly, and there's some that don't, but if you get in the jurisdiction that does, the judge might order some very early discovery. So 10 people spending about 24 hours to produce information, back to the judge about things like policies and procedures and requirements and testing and any of the other things that may be relevant to your defense of the case. So $54,000 there. Going to have a lot of status meetings with, counsel, status meetings with internal folks producing documents. So 7 people here, 10 hours per participant, 70 hours total for $15,000. You're going to have to prep for court status hearings. You've got to prep your internal counsel. You've got to prep your external counsel. A lot of meetings going on there. So 6 participants, 5 hours each, 30 hours for $67.50. Prep for negotiation. So there's another thing about the lawsuit that I didn't mention. We're also using an example here of a lawsuit that was settled fairly quickly for, let's say, a negligible amount of money. So we agree to fix the problem and the lawsuit settled. However we got to that process, it's been resolved. So we're going to prep for negotiation, which is going to be another 6 people at 5 hours and 30 hours total for $67.50. And then negotiation, 3 participants, 3 hours per participant, 9 total hours at $2,000. Because there's so much stuff to do, there's 2 pages to this table. So now we've got settlement drafts. That's 5 people, 5 hours each, 25 hours, 56.25. Settlement draft review, more people have to look at that because the settlement's got to be approved by many people. So 10 people, 4 hours per participant, 40 hours for $9,000. Then we've got to finalize it, another 5 people, 2 hours, 10 hours total for $2,250. Then settlement processing, that's 3 people, 2 hours per participant, 6 hours total, $1,350. Then hold order release. So after we've held all those records, we have to release the records at the right time. So you got those 45 people back, probably taking a couple of hours, putting everything back in order, releasing the holds. So another 90 hours there for $20,000. And then finally, you're going to have to close out your project and file and document and other things. So miscellaneous admin work, 8 people, 8 hours, 64 hours for $14,000. So you can see from the litigation grand total on this page, so for a fairly simple lawsuit that's settled quickly with, I'll say, conservative per hour rates and a conservative retainer for external counsel, $356,775. Again, money that's all potentially wasted if we hadn't put the issue out there in the first place, or if there was a complaint and we were unable to, immediately address the complaint in a way that would have avoided the lawsuit. We've just spent $350,000 approximately, which can certainly be used someplace else. And I'll say that, again, from my experience across many of these, that this number is also low. But again, I want you to calculate it, for yourselves with your own information, and come up with your own results there. But that's a large number in anybody's book. So what do we do about this? Same thing with complaints. There's some actions we can take. So the same things we talked about before, they really still apply. So let's just eliminate the defect making it to production in the first place using that shift left mentality. And then we're not going to have a complaint and we're not going to have a lawsuit. Again, automation is your friend here. So, automated reports, automated tools, make sure those are 100% clear, again, with no false positives. What you've just done there is eliminate a large potential for problems for your customers or prospective customers. And then again, make sure those response channels are ready for the complaint and handle the complaint in the right way. Expediency, empathy, efficiency, and that permanent fix. Prevent that complaint from becoming a lawsuit. That's the key. And so using these numbers and the numbers from the complaint, you can make a very good business case that will certainly stand to say we need to invest some money in accessibility as a practice, as an integrated part of our content development for our organization. So other things to take into account, we already know that litigation's dramatically risen this 181%. We already know that focusing heavily on the complaint handling can avoid the litigation. And we already know that having an accessible digital presence is the best strategy for complaint and litigation cost avoidance. So it's certainly the best defense is to have a good offense, right? There are a lot of money and people involved. So we talked about what it was going to cost for the complaint and what it was going to cost for the litigation. But I do want to talk a little bit about, why this is becoming a bigger issue. So a little bit more information about the 181%. So I've got some information here, and the references for all of this data are in the slide and in the notes sections on the slide. So you can go reference this information as well. But this shows disposable income in billions of dollars across some disability categories. So vision, just over 40, hearing difficulty, just over 80, self-care, about 5, ambulatory, almost 120 billion, cognitive, probably 95 billion there, and then independent living difficulty up at about 140 billion. And actually, in total, when we look across this, the total after-tax disposable income for working age people with disabilities is approximately $490 billion. So when you look at this market share, it's hard to imagine why companies wouldn't prioritize accessibility to get some of this market share. For comparison on that $490 billion number, the African American market segment is $501 billion, and the Hispanic market segment is $582 billion. So this is a major, major source of market share and funding that if you're not accessible, you're simply giving that money away. There are a couple other presentations that I do, and one of them talks about the return on investment of accessibility and goes into some e-commerce statistics that we have that shows, how much e-commerce is up for grabs for companies who are accessible from the companies who are not accessible. And I won't go into that now, but if people are interested in that, you can certainly, meet me out on LinkedIn, and we can talk about that. But with 20 million U.S. working age adults reporting at least one disability, this is very significant, about 35% there. So lots of money, lots of people. DQ earlier this year commissioned a research by Nucleus Research, or commissioned a study by Nucleus Research to do some specific survey information into the community of people who are blind. And they surveyed, I think it was along the order of 80 people, to get some really interesting information. And what we found out from this group is that more than 70% of the internet sites, in their experience, have critical accessibility blockers. The internet users who are blind are calling a company's customer service department once a week on average because of website issues. 90% of this study group reported that they regularly call customer service multiple times to report an issue, even though they've already abandoned the transaction. So in those first three, bullets there alone, you can see the potential for those calls in the complaint channel, and you can understand how that complaint number could very quickly get to 100 or more per year. And the last one, which is really very surprising, and one of the clear and more simple and less costly things you can do, is that fewer than 1 in 3 websites analyzed had clear contact information or means for a consumer who's blind to report accessibility challenges. So a lot of websites are failing right off the bat by not simply having an accessibility page where people can immediately get to a person who can help them if they have accessibility issues. Getting near the close here, I do want to talk about, so we talked a little bit about the predatory lawsuits and some of the law firms, and I'm sure you're aware of who they are, who are, basically sending demand letters out. They're not really looking at the websites. They may not even have, some type of injury there. So the people here are not necessarily trying to use the websites, but they're sending demand letters and they're getting settlements and they're making money. They don't make a lot of money, so they have to handle that through volume. So we do see a lot of them. But there's a couple of efforts to limit the Americans with Disabilities Act lawsuits. And I just want to say that these are certainly not answers to the situation. One is at the federal level, House Resolution 620. Just a quick status on it. It's passed the House, but no further action has been taken. And what both of these are essentially trying to do is they're trying to set some, periods of delay between a person seeking relief and things and hoops that people have to jump through when they have issues and are unable to use the website before they can get to litigation. And really see these as a problem. So the predatory litigation is a problem, but this is a problem too, because people under the law have a right to seek relief if they've got some type of injury, and certainly when that's occurring, we don't want people to be unable to do that. So House Resolution 620 is still standing with no further action. The first time I talked about this in Virginia, House Bill 2296 had actually been passed and was sent to the governor. And I had some information in this presentation about contacting the governor to express concern about this bill. And it was actually vetoed by the governor of Virginia. And it was vetoed for that reason I just said, that they didn't want to put unreasonable barriers between people who had a consideration under the law and their ability to have that consideration considered in a court of law. So that one's been vetoed. We see other states working on things like these, and so hopefully we won't see those come up. Yeah, there are efforts to try to limit some of that litigation. But again, not answers to the situation. What we want to do is we want the world to be accessible so that we don't have to be accessible through litigation. It's the most expensive way to do it. I think I've just shown you that in the information that I provided. So certainly if we're going to invest money in it, let's invest money in being accessible. So in conclusion, the best defense is a good offense. And how do you have a good offense? Well, you have a good plan, or you have, some good plays. This is just a quick chart that I added in here to show the software development lifecycle and how DQ facilitates that shift left or start from the left if you're just starting, or shift left if you're already running and trying to retrofit. But we do have tools, WorldSpace Attest, WorldSpace Assure, WorldSpace Comply, and Amaze that can be used in each of these cases. And I don't want to make this a commercial for DQ, but so there are certainly other products you can use here too. But I just urge you to use something in this space. But when you use something, seek something again that doesn't have false positives, that'll give you actionable information versus things to do that aren't necessarily moving the needle. Okay, and that's all I've got for today. I think we're relatively on time here, about 10:45, so we've got a little time left for questions and answers. So Christopher, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Glenn. I thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it. That was a very interesting and insightful presentation. We do have a couple questions that people have put in the chat, as well as the Q&A. We've got a question from Glenn. And you may have already answered this, but it looks as if he was looking for references, particularly in the 2017-2018 numbers for New York and Florida. And you had mentioned that they may be in the notes section. Is that correct?
Yes, those are all in the notes section. So there's basically 3 different references. I've got a reference for the legal statistics. I've got a reference for the market share statistics, and I've got a reference to the nucleus research that are available in the notes there.
Great, thank you. There's another question from Liz. Are there statistics on the percentage of litigations against government agencies broken down by state?
Yes, they are. Actually, if you go out there and look at the full report, and by the way, the source that I've given here is just one of many. Again, if you wanted to look at it, and I did not use Lainey Feingold's here, but if you're familiar with Lainey, she has this information as well, and it's out there on her website. But yes, they are broken down by state, and actually, if you're interested in getting the source information yourself, there are ways through government repositories to get this, especially at the federal level. There's a site called pacer.gov, PACER.gov. You can go out there and search lawsuits. You can search specifically under Americans with Disabilities Act, and you can actually pull up any of the documents you like from those lawsuits that have been filed. So many different ways to get information. And again, if you get stuck on one, or you want to reference, beside this one, certainly let me know on LinkedIn, and I can help you with that as well.
Great. Thank you. Another question came in. Does DQ have any automated tools or solutions for mobile apps in accessibility?
We do. And so if you're not familiar, DQ has what we call AXE-Core. That's AXE, Core, C-O-R-E. And AXE-Core is actually our open source rules engine. So if you go out to GitHub and search on that, you can look at the actual rules that we run and how we align that to the WCAG success criteria. All of our tools are built on that rules engine. And by the way, that rules engine is, I won't say guarantee, but I'll say very close, or always no false positives. Sometimes we have bugs, everybody gets bugs with a false positive, but if we experience that, we immediately fix it. So all the tools are built on top of that. There is a tool called Attest that's used in the development stage. We have Attest, a browser extension for browser web pages. We have Attest HTML, which can be put into your build process, and then we also have Attest for native mobile for Android and for iOS. So it covers all that across. But again, so if you were to run product name there. If you were to run a test on any of those, you get the same results because they all run on the same rule engine.
Great, thank you. Another question came in. Do you find companies that would rather settle the suits, seeing that as it's less costly than fixing the issues?
Absolutely, and that's one of the points I'm trying to make here, is that they do settle the suits because they see it as less costly than fixing it. But I think many of them are not thinking about this from an aggregate long-term perspective. So I don't know if we call this short-term Wall Street thinking or how you describe it, but when you look at the actual costs, I would challenge any of them to say, I'm going to figure up every penny that I put into this lawsuit, both the operation of it and the settlement of it. And then I'm okay with doing that, 100 times a year or 10 times a year. And the complaint's the same way. It's really the aggregate that gets up there. And when you get up into $1 million or, $2 or $3 million, and that's more money than most people are spending on their successful accessibility programs, over a year or two. So certainly the aggregate suggests that it should be invested there, but I think it's up to all of us as accessibility professionals and advocates and allies to make that case and push to do that. But yeah, certainly some companies try to settle. We could talk a little bit about dominoes. Some companies are still trying to say that the Americans with Disabilities Act doesn't apply to the web. I think that's long gone with all the Department of Justice consent decrees. There was a recent ruling in California, which once again, reinforced this notion. But yeah, we still see some people try to contest that, and we see some people, just settling because I think they're thinking of these events as singular.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question came in. It's a little bit longer here. So as somebody who's trying to get my company on board with digital accessibility process and trying to show the higher ups that is more lucrative to integrate a process from the very beginning of our Dove team workflow, what are some good resources that I can provide?
Absolutely. So I talked about the other presentation that I did, which was called the return on investment of accessibility. And I think that's out on the DQ website. That was actually a webinar, but I think it's out there and you can pull it down. So Christopher, I'll get you a reference link to that after this, or I'll have Laura send you one. But if you go out and you look at the slides from that presentation, you'll see a lot of information I put together. And basically it's in 4 different sectors. So the first one is, and really what I was trying to do there too, is I'm trying to say that there are positive motivation factors to accessibility. A lot of people see it as just trying to avoid risk. Actually, there's things that far outweigh the risk, and we talked about that a little bit with the market share. So the first set of information has to do with market share and e-commerce potential and what you're missing out on if you're not accessible. Because when you're not accessible and you're selling a product and people, can't purchase it, they don't abandon the purchase. They just go get it from somebody else. So you've missed out on that. So we talk about market share. We also talk about operational costs in an omni-channel organization. So if you think of an organization that has maybe brick and mortar stores, they have a call center, they have, a website, multiple ways of doing business. The digital presence is always the cheapest way to do business. In fact, we've seen companies like Verizon do interesting things. And if you get a new phone with Verizon, I think it's $40 if you do that in the store, but it's only a $20 activation fee if you do that online. So, and the reason they're doing that is because it's so much cheaper for them to transact that with the digital versus the brick and mortar store. And then the last one to talk about there, and you'll see a lot more details there, is social justice. People are of the notion that they probably don't want to do business with you if they see you mistreating anyone. And so this comes back to brand damage and the other issues. And a group of leading CEOs just recently, I think this was a Washington Post article, talked about moving away from maximizing shareholder value as the only target for companies. So the social justice aspect of this is huge too. And through that survey that we did, we also found that these people who have problems, people with disabilities have problems, they're influencers. You may lose an entire family or an entire family and friend ecosystem if you've mistreated someone, and they're going to provide reviews. So that has become a real thing, and you've seen several companies under assault from boycotts, some that have to do with, supporting, I don't want to get into politics, we'll say different things, but this has become very popular, and that's an issue too. So those 4 things: market share and e-commerce, operational costs, social justice, and then finally what we talked about today was mitigating risk and legal costs and actions.
Thank you, Greg. It was great. Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Another question came in. Again, it's a little long one, so bear with me. We get questions from our teams on why we focus on WCAG compliance more than on screen reader usage needs versus customers with cognitive, auditory, and mobile needs. Our approach is when our semantic code and UX flow are designed for their needs, we address many of the other communities with the atypical abilities. Does that make sense to you?
It absolutely makes sense to me. So we've got to remember that WCAG is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So it's a guideline. And as it's been established by legislation, so in Americans with Disabilities Act through Department of Justice consent decrees again, because ADA doesn't really say anything about websites, we've established WCAG 20A plus AA as the standard. But some legislation like Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act up in Canada have cited specifically WCAG A followed by WCAG AA, I think, requirements in 2021. So there is an aspect of requirement there in the normative part of WCAG. But what we should really focus on is we should focus on usability. I mean, this is just usability. So if you have an experience that can be used by people with varying abilities, then you've won. And if the site's usable by people, but it's not necessarily WCAG conformant, and I know I'm probably going to get a lot of screams on this, but I say it's a lot. I am not targeting WCAG conformance. I am targeting digital content that can be used by people with varying abilities. That's what I target. WCAG is just a guide to get there. And sometimes you need to go all the way there, and sometimes you don't. And you have to think about the differences between level A and AA and AAA. A great one is a link being determined by the text alone, right, rather than context. So if I say, if you want my presentation, go to this link, and the link says link, right? Well, that's an experience, right? And you can get it from the context, and that's AA. But the AAA standard is for people to not just have link be the thing that they're aware of, to have actual text there that says what it is. So sometimes you'll want to go to AAA, sometimes it's not that expensive, but focus on having a delightful or remarkable user experience, and focus on people who are going to do things in different ways, whether they're using keyboard or they're using screen readers or some type of alternative input. Focus on making things simple. If it's hard for a person with a cognitive disability, it's too hard for your standard customer, right? I mean, it's just usability. So I do preach on that a lot, but I totally agree with what the questioner was saying there.
Thank you, Greg. Another question has come in. Does a tool like inaccessible.com make your site accessible?
I would prefer not to comment on specific tools. Again, DQ's in the tool business, and I'm not doing this presentation as a commercial for DQ, but I would rather not comment on individual tools. Again, if people are interested in some of that stuff, they can always contact me through the various means that you can get a hold of me, or feel free to contact DQ, and we can help you understand what things are, mostly actionable information or non-false positive, and what may have false positives in it. So, but I really want to stay away from comment on anybody's tools, if that's okay.
Understood, definitely understood. There's a couple questions on getting access to the resources, and we will be sending out the handouts as well as the survey, as well as the Greg's information, LinkedIn information. You will not have to come in under the membership of IAAP. There was a question in the box about that will be pushed out independently. There's a question here that says, can companies be sued for the same issue more than once?
Yes, there's nothing that, well, okay, let me make sure I'm accurate on this. So you can't be sued by the same person for the same issue more than once if you've settled. So, and only if you settled in a certain way without prejudice. So legal terms going on here, but if you've settled with somebody, they can't just turn around and sue you again for the same thing over and over again. But there's nothing that keeps anyone from suing you for the same issue, maybe separate lawsuits. And if you get too many separate lawsuits, you end up with the very nasty lawsuit, which is a class action. So there's really, in the end, there's nothing that can keep you 100% from being sued for anything. But there are things you can do that give you a good defense to those suits, and a great way to respond with the money you're investing and the things you're doing, and fixing the issue. If you fix the issue and the person's injury is repaired, right, or taken away, the suit doesn't stand anymore, right, because we've just fixed it. So, but there's no magic button that says I can't get sued, but there are legal ways of settling a suit to keep the same party from suing you again.
Thank you, Greg. There's a couple more questions. I know we're getting close to the end. I know you've got two other slides that you want to share, but let me get through these two questions. And if any additional questions come in, we'll definitely get them out to Greg for his response. Can you tell us a little information about Domino's asking the Supreme Court to shut down a lawsuit about making the websites accessible?
Yeah, I mean, just very quickly on that, and I mentioned them earlier. So again, what Domino's is all about here. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the last update, was written at a time when the web and especially native mobile and things like that weren't prevalent. So it talks about places of public accommodation relating to mostly physical accommodation. And what we've seen some companies try to do is say that this doesn't apply to me because it doesn't say a website and it doesn't say a website and it doesn't say WCAG or anything like that. And in Domino's case, they say that even as they admit that it would be beneficial for them to be accessible because they're probably losing some market share. You can't get a Domino's pizza through the Domino's app. I like Domino's pizza just fine, but there's other pizza I like just fine too. So I'm going to get it from someplace else, right? As they push this, I think the answer they're going to get back. So if the Supreme Court stays in line with most everything else we've seen, they're going to get an answer back that yes, it does. What we all want is the federal government to have a rulemaking session for ADA where they give us some specifics. They address the web and tell us what they want, and perhaps they do it in a way that they've done up in Ontario for the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or the way they're doing in Canada, or the way they've done it in Europe, right? So the United States is behind here, but I think overall they're not going to win this stuff, and it's just counterintuitive to spend the money doing this when they could just spend the money, fixing their application and making it available to everybody so they could sell more pizza. Now all these legal things on these cases. This is Greg Williams' opinion, right? So don't take it as fact, but again, I think they're going the wrong way there. I mean, Department of Justice has said over and over and over, if you look through consent decrees, that yes, it does apply. And there are, district courts who have backed that up and companies who have gone into settlements, to fix, remediate their content and fix it. And so I'm not sure I agree with I don't agree with their strategy, and I certainly don't agree that they're going to be successful.
Thank you, Greg. We've run out of time. If you want to go through the next couple of slides, that would be great.
Okay.
There was a couple more questions that came in, and if it's okay with you, maybe we can include your responses to those questions in the information that we'll be sending out to everyone. Does that sound good?
Absolutely. I'd be absolutely happy to do that. And again, if people want to connect on LinkedIn and have questions, you certainly get a hold of me that way. You can get a hold of DQ at dq.com. We can help you out there too. And the last two slides are just a couple things about DQ. So this is the entire DQ company group, with the exception of some of our partners in India who did come over at our company-wide conference last year. And then there you can see we've got some social media connections if you're interested in joining there. And certainly I know we had some questions on the tools and on Axe Core. You can learn a lot more there. And then finally, here's some references. So people were asking about those. So there's the 2018 accessibility lawsuit recap. There's the study on the market segment, the hidden market purchasing power working age adults, the anonymized F100 data and stories, which I don't have anything more than just that that's all protected information. And then finally, a couple of links to the DQ shift left strategy and how you can execute on that. And that's it.
Excellent. Well, I tell you what, Greg, thank you so much for the presentation. As I said, it was very insightful and gives you a lot to think about. I want to thank the team, the IWP team, Tara, our captionist. Thank you very much, Tara. Handouts will be sent out. Contact information for Greg will be sent out, as well as the recording of this event. So again, thank you very much, Greg. Applause, right. Applause. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks everyone for your time this morning. And I appreciate you joining me in the push for digital equality. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.